So what's your reaction to what we heard from the speaker? He was tough. He was blunt. If the president does something unilaterally through executive action, changing the immigration system, he's playing with matches, and there will be fire. He said, don't do it, Mr. President.
Well, look, the president has worked really hard to try to pass immigration reform. He has held off. As he said the other night, he's been incredibly patient on this. And he feels, rightfully so, that the families who will be affected by this cannot wait on the hope that Congress will do it. I believe at this press conference, the speaker was asked, can you guarantee you would bring it up if the president did not take action? And he could not guarantee that. And so we're going to have to take action. But look, I think the president made it.
Just interrupt for a second. So you're saying if the Congress does not consider comprehensive immigration reform in the coming weeks before the end of this year, the president will sign an executive order changing the rules.
He's going to, he will, as he said at his press conference, he will do what is in, by the end of the year, what options are legally available to him to try to fix our broken immigration system. Now, that's not a substitute for a legislative solution. We still need that. And there's no reason that Congress can act after the president. And the second they do that, they will supersede his order and they will get what they want.
But they will see this, as the speaker says, the new majority leader, Mitch McConnell, yesterday, they see this as a poke in the eye. They think that would be terrible.
Look, I think that we have to understand we live in a world of divided government. We have a very conservative Republican Congress in the House. They are going to pass bills that we are not going to sign. And we're going to take executive actions they're not going to like. That's what divided government's like. What we can't do is use those things as an excuse to not work with them. What if the president came out yesterday and said, if the House of Representatives passes repeal of Obamacare, then they're going to poison the well and I will not work with them on anything? That doesn't make any sense. So we're not going to agree on everything. Let's find the things we can agree on and work. And the president is hopeful, realistic about the challenges we have, but he wants to use the meeting tomorrow to begin to make progress because we have two things we need to get going on pretty quickly. One is funding to deal with Ebola, both in Africa and here at home, and also begin working on our authorization of military force for ISIL.
So one way or another, between now and the end of this year, millions of undocumented residents of the United States will have a pathway to some legal status based on what the president signs into law.
Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics of what the president's going to do. I will wait for the announcement to do that. I'm sure that'll be amply covered when he does it. But as he said, he will use what authority he has to try to do what he can to fix the broken immigration system. It's not going to be everything we want to get done. There's no question about that, but it's an important thing to do. And these families have waited too long.
That'll be a huge issue at this luncheon tomorrow. Set the scene.
I suspect it might.
Yeah, because Mitch McConnell, the new, he's going to be the majority leader in the Senate, and the speaker, they were very, very blunt in their comments, and they said basically, Mr. President, don't even think about doing that. There's a legislative process. Go through the Congress.
We've been waiting for a long time for the legislative process. The Senate passed the bill with 69 votes. The House has never even begun to act on it. And so the president has to act. It's the right thing to do. He made a commitment to do it. He's going to do it. But let's not make that an excuse to not work together on the things we can agree on.
What do you say to those who argue, you know what, the Democrats suffered a huge, huge political setback this week? Those who went out and voted, they voted by and large for Republicans, and they say, Mr. President, hear what we're saying.
Well, as the president said yesterday, the voters sent a message. He is listening to them. And the folks who didn't vote, the two-thirds of voters who didn't vote, also sent a message. They were so frustrated with our political system, they didn't think it was worth the effort to vote. And we got to address that. And the president has a unique responsibility to do that. And he's going to work hard. And that means doubling down our efforts to work with Republicans. We're realistic. It may be hard to get things done, but it's not going to be for lack of trying on his part. But also, people expect results. So the things that we can do on our own, we're going to do that as well.
And if the Congress starts passing legislation, either tinkering with or major changes in Obamacare, will the president go along and sign those into law? Will he veto all those pieces of legislation? Because they're going to have the votes in the House and the Senate.
Well, we've always said that if people have good, constructive improvements to the Affordable Care Act, we will listen to those, whether they come from Republicans or Democrats, from the business community or elsewhere, we will do that. What we're not going to do is undermine the core promise of the Affordable Care Act, the idea that every American should have access to affordable health care. If they send those bills to him, he will veto them. If we want to have a conversation about how to improve the law, he will be happy to host that conversation in the White House.
Here's the bottom line question. We got a lot more coming up, but the president's not only the commander-in-chief, the leader of the United States, he's also the leader of the Democratic Party. Did the Democratic Party, did the president going into this most recent election screw up?
Look, I think that this was a very tough night for Democrats. The president and his team take responsibility for the role we played in that. But this was a tough election. where we can improve and help and look long term about how we can do better in elections, how we can do better in governing, we will absolutely take those steps. It's a process we will go through.
So why do so many people think the country is moving in the wrong direction? If the economy is improving, growth is improving, millions of jobs are being created. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be an announcement, more new jobs having been created. The stock market has gone from 7,000, the Dow Jones, to 17,000. Unemployment has gone down. You know, it seems that most Americans have. Rich people have felt it, but most middle-class Americans don't think the country is moving in the right direction.
Well, I think we sort of you have two elements here, but it's also important to recognize this is a long-term trend. I think it's been about 10 years since a majority of Americans thought the country was moving in the right direction. This has been a very tumultuous decade with 9/11, the war in Iraq, the financial crisis, what we're dealing with right now with Ebola and ISIL. So there's been a lot of tumult in society, and American people rightly feel that a lot of institutions have let them down. Congress, the federal government, business, media, and so we all got to come together to address it. That is not something that only one party can address. We're going to have to work together on that. But also, you raised a point about the economy. We are making a ton of progress. We have more work to do, and for individual people, because wage growth has been stagnated for so long, aren't feeling enough of the recovery we've had, and we have some ideas on how to do that. We were pleased that 5 states passed the minimum wage, which will help with that.
We've got a lot more to talk about. I know you're going to stick around. We'll take a quick commercial break, but I just want to be precise. You're saying that if Congress doesn't pass comprehensive immigration reform between now and the end of the year, the president will take unilateral action.
As he said yesterday, that is correct.
And the deadline is the end of this year.
Correct.
Okay.